Hi, Mariam. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Your work sits at the intersection of AI, psychiatry, and real-world deployment, and I'm really looking forward to unpacking how those dimensions come together in practice. Before we get into the broader field, I'd love to start with your book, Decoding Despair: How AI is Reshaping Psychiatry, because it really frames many of the questions we're about to discuss. And how does your book frame the central problem you think the field is still not confronting clearly enough?
Well, this book was written for the founders, investors, innovators, and anybody who would like to change the space of the mental health. There are many books talking about mental health separately. There are many books talking about AI. There are many books are talking about some philosophical visions on the psychiatry space. But there are non-books about how to actually build a company, where the innovation starts, and how to address the problems. So my goal was to actually combine this together, give an overview on what is wrong with psychiatry, go into the deep roots about that, talk a little bit about the system, psychiatric system overall, including like pharma companies, insurance, etc. Explain what is AI and what is necessary to build real AI tools that can be helpful, and only after that to discover what are potential innovations that we can see in the space. So my goal was to inspire the readers to build something novel and to improve the field, because mental health right now impacts over 1 billion people globally. So it's a very big problem, and we really need the communal effort to change the space.
I agree with that. And that's a really helpful place to start. And from there, I want to move into how that broader framing shows up in the field as it actually exists today. So, what is the biggest gap between the how AI in mental health is discussed and how it actually performs in practice?
Okay, so to build successful AI, you need three ingredients. The first is algorithm, the second is the computational power, and the third and the crucial one is the data. So the data is the biggest gap that we have in psychiatric field. Historically, psychiatry did not produce any evidence or data, meaning when you visit a psychiatrist, they're usually asking your questions, they're interviewing you, and always in a free form, or like very often in a free form, and they don't create any body of the data, any recordings in a standard way. They don't collect any biological data as well. So that happened that we don't have enough sufficient data to be able to actually build an AI. So, and that is the biggest gap. So the goal right now in the space is to fill the data void, learn how to collect the data that will be very representative and like show the whole population, show the different cultural aspects, different like genders, different ages, races, etc., that will allow us to actually start employing the AI algorithms and starting doing innovations in the space.
Thank you. That distinction is really important. And one place that gap becomes especially visible is in diagnosis. So, given that psychiatry diagnosis relies heavily on subjective and self-reported data, how can AI improve accuracy without reinforcing existing bias?
There are two approaches how AI can change the current diagnostics. One is a like short-term approach, and the other one is long-term. The short-term is just adding some additional data measurements to the psychiatric evaluation. So the diagnosis will be still in the frames of DSM-5, like depression and anxiety. It still will be based on the psychiatric expert system, but it can give him some additional like analysis. For example, AI can analyze the electronic medical record systems and give some predictions or some suggestions to the doctor so they can make their assessment better, and or for example being aware of some information that probably patient will miss. As simple as AI that using the analysis of the conversation or voice recording or even facial recognition, this is something that just improve the quality of the valuation and help psychiatrists not to miss something. This is a short-term approach. There is also a long-term, and the long-term is something that I'm working on and other companies in like biological space. This is a redefinition of diagnosis itself. Like as it now based on the symptoms, it leads to the diagnosis being very heterogeneous, meaning behind the same symptoms, we probably have very different phenotypes of the disorders, which have very different biological underpinnings. And one of the goals of the AI is actually based on the data that represents a global population to identify what is it that we call depression, what is it that we call schizophrenia, what is it that we call anxiety. And probably behind every symptomatic umbrella or every diagnosis, we will discover thousands of novel disorders that can be diagnosed biologically and treated precisely.
That also raises the question of what these systems are actually measuring well. So let's stay there for a moment. What types of data are proving most predictive right now? Language, behavior, biometric signals, or something else? And where are you seeing the strongest signal?
I guess the question even not is what is more predictive, but what do we have enough to even start building AI? So the predictivity level can be identified by two things. Like first is a signal to noise ratio. So understand what is a strong signal, how meaningful is that, and how powerful is it in order to predict it. And the second part is a quantity, because sometimes the quantity can help us to cover the issues with the noise. And that's why we can use different types of data, right? It can be behavioral, like, for example, the way how you act on Amazon, like what music you're listening to on like Spotify, what TV shows you watch on Netflix, and all your patterns. And because we have a lot of data, it is already highly predictive compared to biological, which we don't have enough amount. So I would say there is like no difference in the data that we're using. It's just more about what can come first, and it will depend on availability. So that's why I expect that the first predictive models will be using language, they will be using facial expression, they're going to be using like conversation, tone of voice, behavioral patterns, etc. But on the biological side, I truly believe that there is a lot of more meaningful signal that can actually uncover the phenotypes that we discussed earlier. But there is a complexity on how can we collect the data that's going to represent healthy population, that's going to represent population with the disorders. How can we going to set labels? And that's why it's not that it's low predictive value in this data, but it's just like harder to build AI in the space of biological data.
So even when the data side looks promising, there's still the question of what happens when these tools move beyond controlled settings. And I'd love to ask about that next. What are the main barriers preventing these tools from actually working inside everyday clinical workflows?
To get your solution into clinical setting, you not only need to build it, you not only need to show the efficacy on the clinical trials and also get approval FDA, you need also to work on sales and think how you're going to change the whole way how psychiatrists are doing the evaluation. So you're just changing the whole journey, which is very complicated. So every single step makes this journey more convoluted and harder to achieve. And that's the main reason, that the system is so established that it's really hard to penetrate. And you're going to see the problems in every step. One of my favorite that I list very often, if you will come to the FDA and you would like to show that your diagnosis is good or better than the current one, you would not be able to. Because again, the diagnosis of depression on the biological data, for example, will not match with the Hamilton scale. And you will need somehow to show that whatever you're diagnosing is more accurate. And like there is no way to crack it other than if you will start predicting response to medication. And then when you predicting response to medication, you're dealing with pharma now. So you need somehow to pharma help you to scale the solution. So it's not about lacking of the solutions. It's not about, I don't know, some ethical consideration. There is no one single answer. It's just the whole system is so complex and has so many limitations and so many players, and it's so well established that it's really hard to shake.
And once these tools start entering real systems of care, the conversation shifts very quickly from capability to responsibility. And how do you see accountability and liability evolving as AI becomes more embedded in psychiatric decision-making?
So the answer when and how depends on the complexity of the technology. If we're talking about some kind of note takers or systems that analyze the electronic medical record system or something that helping the psychiatrist into the office during the assessment, it's going to be very easy. So the things that you need to prove is just basically security and the safety of the data, making sure that everything is clear. If we're talking about, like, for example, consumer-based solutions, and there are a bunch of them, some solutions that can analyze your voice and share that, like, okay, there is something changing over the last 2 weeks, and that probably you need to see a psychiatrist. It also something that we can see soon. Here going to be the problem on the scale. So how can you make your customers return and use your platform more often and share the data more freely? And so all the concerns and limitations would be focused around the data privacy. And the final solutions, which are based on the biology, like better diagnostics, medical diagnostics, better medications, more precision treatments approaches, it will take a significant amount of time because it will require a lot of involvement of different players. So it should be like considered by insurance companies, how they're going to reimburse the process. The pharma companies, are they going to like be happy to have companion diagnostic for their medications and help scale it? It's going to be on the clinicians, the way how you're going to train the clinicians and introduce novel approach for diagnosing and treating. So it's not only about building the product, not only validating it, but it's also will be about like building relationship and the networking and the whole system to integrate the solutions. And of course, the liability here, like, and who's responsible for what will be like spread. And this is not a question to answer, this will take some time. Who's responsible for what? Like who's responsible for predicting for drug response in AI space? Is it going to be pharma? Is it going to be the lab? Is it going to be like a technician? So it's still something that is not answered yet. And that's probably will be one of the blockers not helping us to move forward in the field.
Beyond the regulatory side, there's also a bigger question here about the shape of care itself. How do you balance the need for scalable tools with the fact that mental health care depends on nuance that may not translate cleanly into the standardized systems?
Well, this is again different games. The scalability is going to be an issue. The first scalability that you're dealing with is, okay, what are the tools available and easy to sell? So there's many approaches. If you're, for example, doing the biological markers for psychiatric space, you can think about what diagnostic data you would like to use. Is there something novel device and it's going to be painful for you to sell it to get FDA clearance and make sure that every single doctor has it? Or it's going to be something that is already available in the clinics, like, for example, EEGs or MRIs, fMRIs. Then you're thinking about the cost, like what is is there going to be reimbursed for that? So again, you need to deal with insurance and be sure that somebody going to pay for that, okay? So there are many options in which you have to play and in the game of the data quality. Like the more biological it is, the more probably predictive, but it's harder to get and harder to get an access and scale. Or it's going to be some kind of user data, behavioral data, and you will build a solution that is easier to scale, but we don't know the protective value and we don't know how we're going to get the clearance. So even in the book, I'm like discussing about different types of approaches, that how can you find the way that works for you. So like in my approach was to go with the scalable devices like EEGs, because they're everywhere and they're relatively cheap, they're easy reimbursable, they're available in every hospital. That's why I can collect data on scale, and that's why it's not that hard to integrate. But the thing that I need to deal with is to make psychiatrists actually use EEG and learn how to use it and like implement it in daily practice, and the pharma support, because every companion diagnostic that I develop usually comes together with a medication. So you kind of like selecting the problem you want to deal with.
And Mariam, thank you again for joining us. That was a great time with you and listen to all your thoughts and opinion on this field. And this has been a really thoughtful conversation, and I appreciate the clarity you brought to both the promise and the complexity of this space. And thank you to everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on BERYL ELITES.